Cut. What the hell, people? I said no opening crawl to my review. I know everybody else is going to do it. I know everybody's expecting it, but that's what makes it cool. We're not doing one. Got it? Good. Start the review. So Rogue One, a Star Wars story, better known as Star Wars Rogue One. They really should have made that the name of this movie. Seriously, Lucasfilm, just accept it. It's called Star Wars Rogue One. The people have spoken. Let me start over. So Star Wars Rogue One is probably the most anticipated movie of 2016 for a lot of us out there. This is the first Star Wars movie to not focus on the main saga storyline of the Skywalkers and take a stab at one of the storylines going on in the vast universe of Star Wars. This side story in particular focusing on the time between Revenge of the Sith and Star Wars A New Hope, focusing on the rogue unit that steals the plans to the Death Star, leading into the beginning of the story of the Star Wars saga that we all know and love. This movie is directed by Gareth Edwards, who is known for directing a small movie called Monsters, and most recently got a lot of acclaim for his Godzilla remake. Me personally, I'm not a big fan of Gareth Edwards' movies. I think that the visuals of those movies are incredible, but I think his films really lack in story, they really lack in interesting characters, and I feel like he purposefully and almost obnoxiously teases and gives you little tiny nuggets of the things that you really want to see more of, and I personally don't appreciate that about his films. Does he do that in Rogue One? We'll get into that in a little bit. Starting off with the good, visually, this movie is amazing. The ships, the clothing, the tone, the way the planets look, everything visually about this movie screams Star Wars A New Hope. They did a phenomenal job at putting you back into the mindset of watching that original Star Wars movie. Literally everything in this movie looks like it will lead perfectly into A New Hope, even down to the detail of how the people look inside the X-Wings and the A-Wings. It looks just like the original movie. Sound design is also great, and it also puts you back into the mindset of A New Hope. The way that the blasters sound, to the way that the stormtroopers' radios sound, to the ships, the TIE fighters, all of those sounds are the classic Star Wars sounds, and they did a great job doing that as well. One thing that I'll give this movie a lot of credit for is this is the first Star Wars movie that feels like a war movie. For the 5 to 10 people on Earth who aren't familiar with Star Wars, when you read that title, Star Wars, you think that this is all about battles, about ship battles, about ground battles, when really it's more of a space fantasy. Star Wars Rogue One is definitively a war movie. From the beginning of this movie, the tone and the presentation of this story is a lot different from the things that we're used to seeing in the Star Wars universe. There's usually a lot more of a fantastical feel to it. There's a lot more lightheartedness, a lot more fun. This is very dark and dreary, and it's much more of a gritty take on the Star Wars universe. And that's going to split a lot of people. Some people are really going to feel off by this. They're going to feel like this is not a Star Wars movie. And you're going to have some people that feel like this is a really fresh take and something different in the Star Wars universe. I feel somewhere in the middle. While I definitely appreciate the new tone, the new direction, the new feel of this Rogue One movie, especially being a side story, you want it to stand on its own with its tone. I did find myself from time to time kind of missing some of the elements of the saga movies. Something else that I really appreciated that this movie did, even though I am not a fan of the prequels at all. The fact that Disney is saying those are canon, we're taking those movies, we're not getting rid of them, we're not redoing them, they are part of this Star Wars canon universe. I like the fact that they brought characters back from those prequels to star in this movie, like Jimmy Smith's character, Genevieve O'Reilly's character. I appreciated that they put that connective tissue in there, because if you are going to own those prequels, you might as well own them and do it right and really dive into it. Where they could have just as easily said, yeah, those movies are canon, and then they just forget about them and we never hear about the prequels ever again. The group of rebels that you're following throughout the story in Rogue One is a really diverse cast, it's a really diverse group of people, and that was cool to see. It was funny, as this group of rebels were being collected in the first third of this movie, I found myself thinking they had jumped right out of a video game. You got the sniper, you got the guy who uses the bow staff, you got the droid, you got the guy with the gigantic heavy machinery gun. I was watching it and I'm thinking I'm about ready to choose my class before I jump into a multiplayer match. Now, as far as what I felt about the characters in Rogue One, they're a little bit of a mixed bag, and that's where I'll start to transition into some of my negatives of this movie. The majority of your screen time in this movie is shared between Felicity Jones and Diego Luna's character, and to be honest, for me, they were among the least interesting characters of this movie. They start to get interesting towards the end of the movie, but for most of their screen time, they were very one-note characters to me. They're both very serious, they don't joke around a whole lot, they're very antagonistic towards each other, and to me it just got a little bit old after a while. There wasn't really any personality to those two characters. To me, the most interesting characters of the Rogue One group was Donnie Yen's character as the blind warrior who has a really strong belief in the Force, and the droid character of K2SO. K2SO is your comedic relief in Star Wars Rogue One. If you took that character out of this movie, it's essentially a humorless film. He had all the best lines. He's really the character you care the most about in the Rogue One group. He's got a very different tone and a very different style of humor from the other droids we've seen in the Star Wars movies, yet he has the same charisma and the same charm as C-3PO, R2-D2, and BB-8. Orson Krennic is your main antagonist of this movie. He's the director of advanced research for the Emperor. He's the one who's building the Death Star, operating the Death Star, and he's got a really good story that coincides with Jyn Erso's character, which makes for a really good journey for when those two characters eventually collide. But with the Emperor in the background, with Vader in the background, he never really has much of an intimidating presence. Now, moving past the main characters of the Rogue One group, the side characters in this movie not only have some of the most interesting characters in this movie, but unfortunately are also some of the characters that we get to see the least of. Mads Mikkelsen's character of Kalen Erso, the father to Jyn Erso, the main character of the movie, he was the most interesting character in this movie to me. Not only am I a big fan of Mads Mikkelsen as an actor, but his character just seemed the most fascinating to me. This guy that is basically a slave to the Empire, being forced to work on this death weapon, and we barely get to know him. The other character that I was really intrigued by was Forrest Whitaker's character of Saw Gerrera, who is a veteran of the Clone Wars. And when you see this guy has been through some shit. He's one of those characters that I just want to sit down in a room and be like, all right, dude, tell me your story. But unfortunately, just like Mads Mikkelsen's character, we get to see Forrest Whitaker's character for a very brief period of this movie. Now, the third character that I was most interested in seeing more of, that a lot of us were more interested in seeing more of, that a lot of us are going to be really disappointed with the amount of screen time that this character got, Darth Vader. Gareth Edwards, I find your lack of Vader disturbing. This is where Gareth Edwards as a filmmaker drives me absolutely insane. I understand completely that this movie is focused on the Rogue One group. I understand completely that this is not another chapter of Anakin Skywalker's story. But the marketing, the lead up to this movie, all of your fans' expectations is that we get to see Vader throughout this movie, or we at least feel his presence throughout this movie, and he's barely in it. He does have one really cool scene that I'm not going to spoil, but by the time I got it, I had already been so impatiently waiting, I had already been teased throughout the movie that it's the same effect I got in Godzilla. By the time I got it, there was no way you were going to deliver the amount of Vader that I needed to make up for all the waiting that you made me do. Now, aside from my issues with some of the characters of this movie, my other biggest issue with this film was the story. Now, when you make a prequel, your biggest hurdle is that your audience, for the most part, knows where the movie is going to end. We all know that the Rogue One group is going to get the plans of the Death Star. We all know that those plans are going to end up in the hands of Princess Leia. We all know that the Empire is going to lose their battle in this movie. And the way that you overcome the hurdles of a prequel is that you fill your movie with really interesting characters, really interesting relationships, take some twists and some turns, go in some directions that your audience is not expecting it to go on the way to that ending. And this movie didn't do that for me. I knew exactly where this movie was going from the opening credits. Speaking of opening credits, why the hell didn't this movie have an opening crawl? I know they made such a huge deal out of it whenever this movie was getting produced that, yeah, we're going to have a different take, we're going to have side stories, so we don't think we're going to have an opening crawl. We want this to stand on its own. Why? It sounds like a really stupid criticism for somebody who's not a real big Star Wars fan, but for somebody that really loves Star Wars, the opening of this movie is so jarring. All of us who love Star Wars look forward to that initial excitement of the opening of a Star Wars movie. You get the Lucasfilm logo that slowly fades in, you see the "a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away," that fades out, and then dun! And when this movie started, my entire theater was sitting there waiting for that time to come, and the movie just started. It was really jarring, it was really weird, it's a strange decision. It doesn't add anything to the movie that they didn't do an opening crawl. It doesn't really take away from the movie either, but I'll do this comparison. A Star Wars movie with no opening crawl is like a Marvel movie with no post-credit scene. Does it affect the overall movie? No. But it's a very important piece to the experience. So to wrap all this up, guys, I am a huge Star Wars fan. I was really looking forward to this movie. I was really looking forward to going back to the early feel of the Star Wars movies from A New Hope. I was really looking forward to some good characters, to expanding the Star Wars universe. I was really looking forward to seeing more of the most iconic villain in movie history, and I was underwhelmed by almost all of that. Yes, this movie is visually amazing, but I cannot recommend it just based off the visuals alone. Because if I do that, I might as well recommend the prequels, because the prequels had amazing visuals too. Not only does this movie really not excite me too much for the further side stories that we're going to be getting, but this movie pretty much cements the fact in my head that I am not a fan of Gareth Edwards at all. I would almost go out on a limb to say that I hate him as a filmmaker, because he just so obnoxiously throws in your face that he is not going to deliver what you want to deliver. Everybody wanted to see Vader in this movie. Everybody. You had the opportunity to deliver the biggest, baddest, coolest, most memorable Vader scenes that we have ever seen in Star Wars history, with all the technology and the budgets that we have today, and you completely drop the ball on that element of this movie. And that is one of the biggest elements that a lot of Star Wars fans are going to be walking into this movie expecting to be delivered upon. And you didn't. It's not that you tried and failed. It's not that you didn't quite measure up there. It's not that it's one of those, feats that people, if you're a huge Star Wars fan, you're just never going to quite get there. You didn't even try. You didn't even bother. You didn't even find it important to put that into your film. And fuck you for that. Star Wars Rogue One is a visually incredible movie. It really puts you back into the feel of the original Star Wars film, A New Hope, from the uniforms to the ships to the look of different aspects of the film, the way that the shots are taken from inside the ships. All of that is great. But every other element that you go to a Star Wars film to see is underwhelming completely in this movie. The story, the characters, and the villains. If you're going to go check out Star Wars Rogue One, which I'm sure every single Star Wars fan out there is going to see in theaters anyway, my recommendation, unfortunately, is to check it out on Netflix. So what did you guys think of Star Wars Rogue One? Did you like this story? Did you see where everything was going? Did you feel like the characters were really fleshed out? Or were they a little bit one note like I thought? And what did you think about the amount of Vader that we got? I think that's going to be the biggest polarizing element of this film. Put all your comments on this film down below and let's talk about it. Please like and share this video and hit that subscribe button. That way you get to come back and see me next time. But if that's not soon enough to check out some more of my videos, you can check out a few more by clicking right over here.